If the drivers get told it's none of their business how the FIA makes its decisions, then, well, you would hope that they would actually make some good ones. This race weekend was potentially the single most embarrassing for the stewards and race director for quite some time, endangering drivers, causing untold damage to the cars, and baffling penalty decisions. The embarrassing results of changing your race director and having a non-centralized stewarding system was clear for all to see. A race full of incidents, on-track battles, and some tasty overtakes has been completely overshadowed by some of the worst officiating that we have seen in the sport, with the requests of the GPDA now surely being a necessity more than a polite request. But more than anything else, it has become apparent that Mohammed Ben Sulayem has far outstayed his welcome in the sport. Think that's an extreme opinion? Well, stick around because it's only going to get worse from here. Want to know why the Qatar Grand Prix should serve as a resignation letter? It's been controversy after controversy, mistake after mistake, and surely now the fury of the drivers will need to be heard. So then, just why are we so furious about the FIA, the race director, and the stewards? Let's start off with the parties with lesser blame before moving on to the big fish, shall we? Here's a joke for you. A race director takes charge with no prior F1 experience with only 3 races to go in the season. That's it. That's the joke. Truth be told, we feel bad for Rui Marquez, the man thrown in at the deep end following the unceremonious sacking of Niels Wittich following the Brazilian Grand Prix. Not only was the man thrown in at the deep end by being promoted to F1 duties at the Las Vegas Grand Prix to then direct at the Qatar and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which serve as 2 of the fastest races, while also being night races and also the graveyard of Michael Massey's career, but he was also delivered the news this week that he would have to direct the remaining Formula 2 races because his replacement, Janet Tan, was fired by the FIA as well. This prompted a massive amount of concern from the drivers, as indicated by the current GPDA director and Mercedes driver George Russell, as he said, I mean, just when we've asked for, let's say, a bit of transparency and consistency, we're getting rid of 2 highly important people in the governing body. So it's kind of gone a full 360. We still don't have any reasoning for Niels' removal. I don't think anybody was informed about Tim leaving, and the first I heard about the new race director doing Formula 2 this weekend as well was through the media. We'd love to get a little bit of clarity and understanding of what's going on and, you know, who's getting fired next. However, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, as there is still plenty to say about the race direction of the Qatar Grand Prix itself. It was always assumed that the race would be somewhat chaotic with its 100% safety car record, and at first it appeared that the race direction was going to follow along with the precedent set at the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Quick reactions to lap 1 incidents, as well as other incidents that occurred in the following laps. However, the one issue that has everyone scratching their heads and quite frankly baffled is the hesitancy to call the safety car in reactions to a Williams mirror sitting in the middle of the main straight. At the end of the day, we were expecting mistakes to be made given just how much had been chopped and changed, with Rui Marquez being put in charge of 3 distinct categories. However, this mistake was costly, high profile, and above all else, incredibly dangerous. The safety car was only called after Valtteri Bottas had driven over the debris on the main straight in a DRS zone, and despite glass and carbon fiber being scattered over the circuit, the final call only happened after 2 drivers in the top 10 saw their races highly disrupted by left front punctures. Now, whether that was the cause for it or not, which in all likelihood it was, the fact that a reactionary decision was made rather than a proactive one is the kind of hesitancy which gets races ruined, drivers injured, and while it may sound extreme and melodramatic, we promise it's not, drivers killed. Just throw a virtual or actual safety car, get the debris moved and restart the race. What was the other option? Double waved yellows on the main straight for 25 laps in a row? Speaking of the double waved yellows, the penalties dished out this weekend seemed a lot more draconian than we've seen before. As Anthony Davidson said, the stewards get the footage and judge based on the infringement, and if the rules say X infringement means Y punishment, then that's the end of that. However, it must be said that I don't think I've seen anyone get a stop and go penalty for quite some time, not even for some incredibly dangerous driving by people all throughout the grid. I'd like to highlight that I did not say a driver's name there, and yet you're immediately likely thinking of the same man, so be sure to check yourselves before getting mad at me in the comments. The nature of the penalties this weekend seemed a lot more brutal and precedent-setting, however Andrea Stella has another word for it: disproportionate. We checked the data, effectively Lando stays flat out. We have to say that the sector appeared yellow as soon as Lando had entered the sector, but the requirement is very clear. You need to lift, and it's the responsibility of the driver to recognize that you are in a yellow sector and you need to back off. At the same time, I think it's quite peculiar that the yellow flag was deployed and then it was removed, but actually the situation in the sector was the same. There was debris on track. At some time, it deserved a yellow flag, and then a few seconds after it didn't, which is just unfortunate, I would say. The flickering of whether the yellow flag was out or not was certainly confusing. However, the main umbrage that the team principal took was not whether a penalty should be given. As he said, Norris needed to lift and he didn't. The issue he had was with the extent of the penalty, something which certainly raised eyebrows on social media as well as around the paddock. And then in the application of the penalty, I think we have lost any sense of proportion and any sense of specificity. Can we look specifically at the infringement, at the level of danger associated to the situation, and the fact that the yellow flag was removed, and then judge, using these kinds of elements, proportion and specificity, rather than taking a look at any kind of rulebook, probably full of dust on top of it, and then apply it without any sense of critical approach. So from this point of view, I think there's an opportunity to do better from the FIA. And so that brings us on to the real cause of the issues, as while the stewards and race director clearly had their issues, they all pale in the face of the arrogance, apathy and antipathy on display from the FIA throughout this season. The recent letter by the GPDA already called the governing body into question in a pretty major way, covering their lack of transparency and the tyrannical nature of both the FIA and the man at the helm, Mohammed Ben Sulayem. However, the real response from the FIA, not the silence since the letter and arrogant quips in the build-up to the Qatar Grand Prix, came on track this weekend where they were found guilty as charged on all accounts. That interview with George that we mentioned earlier didn't end with the cheeky jab about who was next to be fired, as he made the GPDA's lack of faith in the FIA and Ben Sulayem clear, as he made sure to highlight who was at fault for all the terrible decisions of late by making sure to exclude some certain names. Definitely when it comes to the FIA, so much is changing, too much is changing and too quickly. I think everybody has faith in liberty and faith in Stefano Domenicali. You know, he was a racer and he's got racing in his blood, so he's doing everything he can do to get the sport in the best place possible. I think the only concern for all of us is that the sport is in such a great place. Everyone is trying their best for the teams, and Liberty and Stefano have done such a great job. So, a governing body that has failed to keep a clean house. A governing body led by a tyrant who has more decisions to fire people than good decisions as of late, and a governing body who has made clear that they are not willing to change in the face of public scrutiny and consistent malpractice. The GPDA made requests a few weeks ago, but after the terrible race direction, questionable stewarding, and arrogant responses from the FIA president, the time for politeness is surely over, as the GPDA's next open letter should be asking for blood. Then again, maybe we're in far too polite of a time where people are more focused on saving face, and if that is the case, then the FIA may yet again do more damage to race viewership than any regulation change ever could.